Shana Tova. This is my 9th Rosh Hashanah at Kol Tzedek. Rabbi Michelle and I started together on August 1st of 2016. As I reflected on the last 8 years, I have realized that there have been no normal years. I joined Kol Tzedek just months before Trump's first election in 2016, and the relentless rise of fascism that led us to the disastrous pandemic of COVID-19 in 2020. A year ago, I remember thinking, if only I can get through the high holidays, then this might be the one year where there isn't a massive, unpredictable thing right after another. Perhaps it might finally come to an end, or at least a pause. And then the heinous massacre of October 7th and the unspeakable siege on Gaza that has followed took hold. There have been no normal years in my time at Kol Tzedek. And at this point, I'm willing to say, and working to accept, that there are no more normal years, if ever there were. Which is to say, we need to stop holding our breath. And even harder, we need to figure out a way to unclench our shoulders and reopen our hearts. The threat of fascism and authoritarianism, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia worldwide is real and it is dangerous. I heard it this past week when Trump said, "If I lose, it's because of the Jews." The earth herself is in a perpetual state of distress, and climate crises are proliferating. The floods in North Carolina are just one devastating sign. Wildfires, drought, record hot temperatures for days on end. And then there are our very personal struggles with anxiety and depression, cancer treatment, career uncertainty, friends and family members in crises, unstable housing, uncertain medical care, and the list goes on. In the words of one of my teachers, Sharon Salzberg, the question is, how can a human heart, how can my heart or your heart absorb the continual, unremitting contrasts of this life without feeling shattered and thinking we cannot bear it? Battered by changes, sunk by loss, the heart-mind becomes brittle, rigid, frail. It can wither and shrink. The Buddha teaches our hearts wilt as a flower does when it has been out too long in the sun. Have you encountered this feeling? So I've asked myself, what can I offer you? What can Jewish tradition offer you? What I want to share with you this morning are practices to cultivate an undefended heart and a settled spirit in a world unrelentingly in crisis. An undefended heart and a settled spirit for a world in constant crisis. This is essential not just for your own happiness, but also so we can be effective and energized and courageous as leaders and activists and as a community. This has been a particularly hard year, and I've thought a lot about what it takes to cultivate calm in the chaos. And that's what I want to share with you this morning. Given the year that lies behind us and the year that lies before us, there is every reason to feel afraid. In a few moments, We will rise in body or spirit for the Unetaneh Tokef. The ancient words recited on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which describe a spiritual reality in which the Holy One is determining our fates for the year to come. The wise Rabbi Alan Lew, Zichrono Livracha, he wrote in the Unetaneh Tokef prayer, the liturgical high point of both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services, the curtains between heaven and earth are pulled back, and we catch a glimpse of the celestial mechanics that govern the earth. In this prayer, we acknowledge the awesome power of this day, its pure sanctity, the deeply felt dominion of the heaven, and the heavenly roots of compassion and justice. Mi yichyeh u'mi yamut, who shall live and who shall die. Given the amount of death and human cruelty this year has included, the weight of these words are heavy. Mi bekitzo u'mi belo bekitzo, who in the fullness of years and who before their time. I am haunted by the tears of Muhammad Abu al-Qusam, who had just picked up birth certificates for his newly born twins in Gaza, only 4 days old, when he found out that in the short time he had been out, they had been killed, along with his wife and her mother, by an Israeli airstrike on the Gaza apartment where they were sheltering as refugees. Too many lives have been cut short this year. Why, God? Why? It's not only about inscribing us in the book of life or death, though. The Unetaneh Tokef is also about what kind of year we might have. Will we be at peace or will we be distraught? Will we be calm or will we be anxious? The question isn't which hardships we will face. The question isn't will we face hardships, but which hardships will we face and how will we respond? About 2/3 of the way through the Unetaneh Tokef, we get a line that's pulled on my heart all year long. Mi yanuach u'mi yanua, which our Machzor translates as, who shall be at rest and who shall be restless. Thinking geopolitically, it begs the question, who shall remain settled and who displaced? I have thought of these words repeatedly as I have watched millions of Palestinians flee for safety again and again and again. I have thought of the Israeli families journeying to and from bomb shelters, leaving towns again and again and again. Lebanese families caravanning north, searching for riverbanks and setting up shacks. But this morning, I invite us to have the courage to quiet the news cycle and turn inward and ask ourselves this question: what in me is restless, and what might it take to settle? One rabbi writes about the Unetaneh Tokef, the answer is me. Who shall live and who shall die? I will. Who in the fullness of years and who before their time? I will die when I die, and it will also be too soon. Who might be restless and who might be rested? I will. This quality of yanuach, of menucha, is picked up in the mystical tradition, and the rabbis write about it as Menuchat Nefesh, a settling of the spirit, a quality that we can cultivate and strive to bring us more inner peace in a world that's at war. Like most Hebrew concepts, there's not one easy translation of this spiritual concept. The closest is probably the Buddhist concept of equanimity. For those who know me, you won't be surprised to see me draw shared wisdom from Buddhist and Jewish traditions. In Buddhist tradition, equanimity is one of the 4 Brahma Viharas, which are essentially 4 wholesome qualities we want to cultivate to make us more free. They are all qualities that we have Jewish ideas for. They are all qualities that we focus on during the days of awe. As the Buddha organizes them, they are metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, shared or sympathetic joy, and upekkha, equanimity. One of my chavrutas taught me that in some traditions these are called the immeasurables. They are boundless states. Our capacity for them, for kindness and compassion and shared joy and equanimity, knows no limit. Not that it always feels that way. In Jewish tradition, we also have an idea of these things being beyond measure or without measure or limit. One of our earliest texts describes mitzvot for which there is no measure. Mishnah Peah begins, Elu devarim she'en lahem shiur. These are the things that have no limit. The list includes the size of the corner of one's field we are obligated to leave for the poor to harvest, time spent studying Torah, and acts of loving kindness, gemilut chasadim. There's a sense that the doing of these things has no limit because it is inherently good and good for us, and therefore we can't overdo it. In fact, the doing of them metabolizes the other qualities we are trying to counteract: the anxiety, the depression, the fear, the restlessness. While the things on this list aren't exactly the same, the idea pervades both traditions. The rabbinic immeasurables are each a form of mitzvah that make us more caring and connected people. What fundamentally has no measure is our ability to do chesed, to do acts of loving kindness. And each of these Pali terms also has an ancient Hebrew counterpart that appears in our machzor. The idea of metta, perhaps most well known, is chesed. We see this word throughout our liturgy. The idea of karuna as rachamim, as compassion. Mudita, shared joy, is our simcha, and upekkha, equanimity, arrives here as Menuchat Nefesh. Sharon Salzberg explains that the 4 boundless states that we call the Brahma Viharas, these divine abodes, they culminate with equanimity. Equanimity, which in Pali probably means something like balance. It is a spacious stillness of the mind, a radiant and radiating calm that allows us to be fully present with the different changing experiences that constitute our world and our lives. I truly believe that to protect access to abortion, to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza, to bring an end to the occupation of Palestine, to limit the suffering of climate crisis, to keep going in the face of endless chemotherapy, to weather the uncertainty of our lives, we individually and collectively need to prioritize cultivating these 4 qualities as a kind of spiritual armor. The Buddha tells this story. A fierce and terrifying band of samurai was riding through the countryside, bringing fear and harm wherever they went. As they were approaching one particular town, all the monks in the town's monastery fled, except for the abbot. When the band of warriors entered the monastery, they found the abbot sitting in front of the shrine room in perfect posture. The fierce samurai leader took out his sword and said, "Don't you know who I am? Don't you know that I'm the sort of person who could run you through with my sword without batting an eye?" The Zen master responded, "And I, sir, am the sort of man who could be run through by a sword without batting an eye." About this story, the great teacher Sylvia Boorstein writes, "Our own benevolence is actually the protection that renders enemies impotent." Our own benevolence is the protection that renders enemies impotent. In depictions of the Buddha's story, the spears and the arrows come to touch the shield around the Buddha, around this abbot, and they actually fall to the ground as flowers all around him. I like to think of those flowers as an illustration of how each of us, by cultivating steadfast goodwill, can dissolve the forces of confusion, fear, and hatred in this world. This is part of the path to equanimity, to Menuchat Nefesh. Fear not, equanimity does not aspire to turn us into gray, overcooked vegetative blobs with all of our feelings washed out. This is not a path of apathy or complacency or indifference. This is an invitation to feel pleasure fully, without defining it as our ultimate happiness. An invitation to feel pain fully, without condemning, hating, or avoiding it. To experience neutral states without just labeling them bored and waiting for the next thing to arise. It is this inner balance that can lead us to freedom in each moment and build the kind of spiritual armor that allows us to have an undefended heart. And I'm not talking about cultivating equanimity in abstraction. I'm not saying, just try to be accepting of whatever arises in your day. I'm suggesting that there are concrete spiritual practices that come to us from honored lineages that we can learn, that we can actually cultivate within each of us and within all of us collectively, the kind of equanimity that we need to be able to find some steadiness amidst an endless cascade of crises. For anyone who has ever heard me talk or teach about metta, or perhaps sat with me a metta meditation, it is a very specific practice in which the person meditating invites into the quiet of their own heart a series of phrases, wishing themselves or for another human being wellness. And it happens through the repetition of these phrases, usually 3 or 4 of them, though there is no right or wrong way to do metta. And there are traditional ones that are described, but not required. Most often when I am practicing metta, I say things like, "May I be well. May I be free from harm. May I live with ease." Metta phrases are in many ways an expression of our greatest aspirations. Call them blessings, if you will, that we might want to offer ourselves and each other. And the brilliance of the practice is that whether or not you offer it to yourself or another, you both benefit. Until this past year, I was only familiar with the phrases of the metta practice. But I've come to know that actually there are phrases that accompany each of the Brahma Viharas, each of the 4 immeasurable qualities. So for the practice of equanimity, we once again can sit or stand, walk or lay down. And the Buddha invites us to offer ourselves these phrases. May I be at ease with the changing conditions of life. May I allow joy and sorrow to arise and pass away. May I open to how it is right now. May I be peaceful. Years ago, one of my teachers told me bluntly, equanimity doesn't happen on the cushion. It happens when your car breaks down on the side of the highway. Or in Jewish terms, equanimity doesn't happen on Yom Kippur. It happens when there's a massacre on Simchat Torah. In other words, equanimity arises in crisis, both personal and collective. In the words of the poet Young Pueblo, because being calm in the midst of chaos is a sign of true power. Sometimes equanimity is the result of conscious intention and effort, but other times it can actually take us by surprise. It is not the practice itself, but the fruit of our practice. Some 12 years ago, when I had gender-affirming top surgery, there were some post-op complications. Some weeks later, I was telling my therapist about this, and he remarked that I was telling him how everything went well, but what I was describing was things actually not going well. I laughed. I hadn't even noticed how far I had strayed from my expectations for how the surgery would go, and I didn't notice how calm I had stayed. Things were actually going wrong, and I still felt good internally. He said, "I'm noticing a lot of equanimity. What's making that possible?" What might have felt in another moment like a crisis felt like a success, and it had nothing to do with the external reality and everything to do with my internal experience. In the months that followed, I spent a lot of time in therapy unpacking what made that possible, almost none of it which was external. All of it was the fruit of years of meditation, my deep commitment to stay calm lest my skin break out in hives as it had done the year before when I had originally been scheduled for surgery but had to cancel it lest my anxiety take over. When something is out of our control, we might internalize that how we relate to what's happening is also not within our control. My surgery taught me otherwise. And lucky for us, Jewish tradition also has a series of phrases. And they are the phrases of the days of awe. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum Vechanun, Holy One, source of compassion and grace. May I have compassion. May I be graceful. Avinu Malkeinu Rachem Aleinu, our sovereign, our source, have compassion for us. Our sovereign, our source, have compassion on me. Chotvenu b'sefer chayim, inscribe us in the book of life. May I be willing to meet each moment of the year to come. Uteshuva, utefila, utsedaka, ma'avirin et roa hagezera, forgiveness, prayer, and generosity can transform the harshness of the decree. Forgiveness, prayer, and generosity can transform the harshness of my heart. I want to suggest that the experience of the days of awe can itself be an equanimity practice. And these are our phrases. In fact, I've come to relate to the 10 days as a retreat in the Jewish calendar, of which services are only one part. There is singing and there is silence. There is schmoozing and feasting. There is apples and honey. Sam, don't leave the room. There is singing and silence. There is schmoozing and feasting. There is apples and honey. And of course, there is the sound of the shofar. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav taught that when the shofar blows 100 times on Rosh Hashanah, a bridge is formed between heaven and earth. Rosh Hashanah is meant to draw us close to the heavenly realm. It invites us to encounter our own mortality. Procrastination is in all of our nature, and this is our annual reminder that our lives have an undetermined deadline. If we were reminded of this every day, we would become more anxious than we already are, which would not be helpful. But it is helpful once a year to be honest with ourselves and to do so in community. It is hard to encounter this truth alone. But when together we encounter the honest truth that our time on this planet is limited, we can create sacred space to really ask ourselves, how do we want to spend our days? What might it take to settle, to spend our days in a state of Menuchat Nefesh? The next 10 days, our tradition instructs us to focus on 3 things: on teshuvah, on tefillah, and on tzedakah. Each of these things fundamentally serves the same purpose. We do them to open the heart, to make us more compassionate people, so that we may live our days and live our year in a state of more compassion. To cultivate compassion in our relationships with each other, in our relationship with the divine, and with the wider world. To transform our inner decree from din to rachamim, from judgment to gentleness. So what I am suggesting is that for the next 10 days, when you're in transit, when you're waiting on hold, when you wake up, when you lie down, that you pick a series of phrases from the Machzor, or the Buddhist tradition, or born of the wisdom of your own heart and body, and recite them on repeat. Write them on your hand, put them like a sticky in your pocket, tape them to your laptop, your doorknob, your stove. Let them be a kind of portable prayer practice or an urgent reminder. And you don't need to know the effects to bear this fruit. You don't even have to believe me that it will work. If it's helpful to say, trust me, trust me. If it's helpful to trust in the tradition, trust this tradition. Even when it has been manipulated and used against our people, trust these words, trust this tradition. If it's helpful to have an accountability buddy in the community, I encourage you to seek a chavruta, an equanimity chavruta, a compassion chavruta. It will make a difference. It will make you more compassionate. It will settle your spirit. It will change your year. Wu Menhukai, a 12th century Chinese Buddhist teacher, wrote, 10,000 flowers in spring, the moon in autumn, a cool breeze in summer, snow in winter. If your mind is not clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life. To see things as they are, to see the changing nature, to see the impermanence, to see our own impermanence, to see that constant flow of pleasant and painful events outside of our control. That is freedom. It is so easy to be swept up. It is so hard to keep any kind of center. I have had so many experiences this last year where I did my morning meditation, I exercised, I did everything I could to ready myself for the day. And then I unlocked my phone, and I opened the news, and I was gone again. I can't know what this year will bring. No one can. I only know that it almost certainly will not be normal, and that equanimity is the first thing to go. So So I invite you to align your goals with that of the Ecuadorian poet Yung Pueblo. He writes, "These are my goals. Develop my calmness. Cultivate my wisdom. Expand my freedom. Help heal the world." These 10 days are a precious opportunity to be on retreat, to build new skills that we all need to get through this year, and to build some amount of equanimity that we are each, that I, that you, that we are going to need. Together, as we begin 5785, I pray that for each of us, this be the best season of your life. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Let it be enough. This moment, it will pass, no doubt, my dear. Let it be enough. This moment, it will come and leave you here. There is no control, no power you can use to keep it near. Let it be enough. Other times will come. This moment is one. Let it be enough. Other times will come. This moment is one. Let it be enough. This moment, it will pass, no doubt, my dear. Let it be enough. This moment, it will come and leave you here. There is no control, no power you can use to keep it near. Let it be enough. Other times will come. This moment is one. Let it be enough. Other times will come. This moment is one.
With gratitude to Marnie Loftman, who wrote that song.